Thank you for your service. Anybody else here in the... Usually I say that to people when I'm running to catch a plane, and they are too, but it's very good to see somebody here in uniform. We sure need you. So, welcome. You know, usually when you address an audience of young people, college people, you always say, these are the future lawyers of America, these are the future doctors of America, these are the future engineers of America. Well, I'm not going to mince words with you. Unless we change things in Washington, you're the future unemployed of America. You know, there's Generation X and there's Generation Y. You are Generation F.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
You're welcome. But it can change. It has to change. And what I'd like to do today is just kind of explain to you why I think we're in this mess and how I think we can get out of it. And pardon me if it sounds like economics, 101 or something, but I won't have any mathematical formulas to bore you with. We have recessions constantly in this country, every 5, 10, 15 years. And it's always the same story. People get rich quick, they take investments they shouldn't, they do crazy things with their money, and it becomes a huge bundle of risk, and all of a sudden it collapses like everyone knew it would, comes crashing down, and then once it hits the bottom, it begins to climb back up as people get over their crazy investments and begin to function again. Bush's administration was there and had a role in causing the June of 2007 recession. And that recession ended, according to The Economist, in June of 2009. Obama took office in January of 2009. And when he took office, he was determined to do everything he could to end this recession as fast as he possibly could. And he decided to apply a huge burst of Keynesian stimulus, a huge burst of spending, to try to get the economy going. And the idea was he'd put $1 trillion out there, people would take the money, they'd buy things, the guys that made the TVs they'd buy would hire more people to make more TVs, the people that made the TVs would get more income, they would buy more, and the process would start, and the economy would come back again. He referred to that as jump-starting the economy. Priming the pump is the phrase they usually use about that. But the problem was that he borrowed the money. It wasn't like they had the money, he borrowed it. And it was such a massive amount of debt that it scared the living hell out of everybody. When Obama took office, the total amount that governments, federal, state, local, foreign, owed in debt was $15 trillion. Now it's $28 trillion. And 5 or 6 trillion of that is on Obama's watch, 3 or 4 trillion of that is state and local debt, and the rest of that is other countries. But there's only so much money to go around in the world. And when people and banks and other investors saw that the United States was piling up this gigantic level of debt, they freaked out. They said, holy cow, they're never going to be able to repay this. This is all going to come crashing down around our ears. Now, freak out is a complicated, sophisticated economic term. For those of you who are doctorals, the formula is a squared minus b squared divided by the square root of c. But freaked out. And then what happened was that the economy didn't move because people were scared. And then Obama decided, I'll double down on it. I'll spend more money, and I'll borrow more money. And I'll spend more, and I'll borrow more, and I'll spend more, and I'll borrow more. Until eventually, everybody was paralyzed by fear of the debt. So why aren't we spending, lending, borrowing, and investing? It isn't that we don't have enough money. We are drowning in money. The currency supply in the United States has tripled since Obama took office, from 800 billion to 2.4 trillion. We're swimming in cash. But what's happened to it? The households of America have gotten $1 trillion in cash. And what they've done with it is to use it to pay down student loans or car loans or lower the Visa bill or catch up on their mortgages. They're afraid it's the last paycheck they're ever going to see. So they don't spend it on a flat screen TV like you'd need to stimulate the economy. They save it. They hang on to it. They prepare themselves for tougher economic times. And so $1 trillion of that money went into everybody's credit card accounts or savings accounts, basically. Didn't do the economy any good. Banks have $1 trillion on hand, not the TARP money. They paid that back. This is when the Fed goes out and basically prints money and gives it to the banks. They call that qualitative easing, QE. There was QE1, that didn't work. QE2, that didn't work. Now they're doing QE3, but I think the better name for that is the Titanic. So they put all this cash into the banks, $1 trillion, and the banks aren't lending it. It's sitting in the Federal Reserve vaults because the banks are so scared to lend it. They're worried that what's going to happen is those loans won't be repaid, and then the regulators will come over them with the new power that the Dodd-Frank bill gives them and close them down, close the bank down, fire the banker, wipe out his stockholder equity, which is his pension, replace the board of directors. That's happened to about 20% of the banks in the United States since Obama took office. A reign of terror among the banks, so they're not going to make any loans. And corporations have $2 trillion of cash, $1 trillion more than they had when Obama took office. They would rather keep it under the mattress, earning no money at all, no interest, rather than investing it in their own companies to create jobs. That's how scared they are. And what's everybody scared of? The debt. How did we get the debt? To pay for the spending. What was the purpose of the spending? To stimulate the economy. So the very thing that we did to stimulate the economy instead is stopping it from recovering. It's like back in the Middle Ages when they used to think all disease was because of evil spirits. They didn't know about germs. So some guy would come in, he'd be sick, and they'd cut his vein open and bleed him and take out some of the blood so the evil spirits would flow out with them. And then when the poor son of a gun was half dead, they'd say, see, he still has evil spirits inside him. And they'd bleed him some more. And then when he finally died from loss of blood, they'd say, I told you he had evil spirits all along. So when Obama just continuously borrows and spends more and more money, he's aggravating the problem, he's not solving it. Now, you're asking the following question in your mind. Is he stupid? Didn't somebody explain this to him? Didn't somebody outline this to him? Well, there are two answers to that. One is the polite one and the other is the impolite one. The polite one is that economists tend to feel that we're automatons. They tend to feel that economics is a science. You put a certain amount of money into the economy, you get a certain amount out. It causes a certain interest rate, a certain unemployment rate, a certain inflation rate, and you can reduce it to a formula. And they often lose sight of the fact that that economics is essentially psychology. And if people are afraid, they're not going to spend money no matter how much of it you generate. You know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And that's one explanation. The other is that Obama wanted to expand the size of government. That he believed that the public sector in the United States should be much larger than it is. Just a little bit of background. 55% of Sweden is public, 45% private. 52% of Germany is public, run government spending. 48% of France is government spending. 42% of Britain is government spending. And 31% of Japan is government spending, 69% private sector. When Obama took office, the United States was at 33. Now it's at 42. And he believes in increasing the amount of money, the footprint of the public sector. And he wants to do good things with the money. He wants to improve schools, he wants to have more scholarship, he wants to have more food stamps, he wants to have better roads and better infrastructure and all kinds of neat things that he's doing with it. I mean, there's the occasional cylinder, but for the most part, he's got pretty good things in mind for it. But the problem is that he just lacked the experience or the understanding of the world's economy to know that you can't take this kind of money out all at once without the world freaking out. Now, Obama, if he were here, and if he were telling you the truth, neither of which is very likely, what he might say in response is, hey, listen, guys, I was elected president in a fluke. I got 60 votes in the Senate. I got an overwhelming mandate from the people. The last time the stars were aligned like this was 1964, when we passed crucially important programs like Medicare and Medicaid and student loans and clean air and clean water. And then basically nothing happened for 40 years. And now I've got the stars aligned again, and I want to move the goalpost down, move the chains down. I want to increase the public sector and do all the things I've wanted to do. And some of them are convenient, some of them are inconvenient. It's probably not the greatest time to completely overhaul the whole healthcare system of the country and scare people half to death. It's probably not a really good time to increase our federal debt from 10 trillion to 16 trillion. It's probably not a great time for us to do all this stuff, but it's the only time I'm going to have the votes. And I want to do this because this is where I think America has to go in the future. And the big thing that I have against the way the country is now is that it's all the private sector. The government is relatively weak in dealing with it, and therefore we can't do all of the good social programs that they do in Europe. And I'm going to do those even though I know it's going to retard the recovery, increase unemployment, and delay the process from healing. If he were here and he were telling the truth, that's what I think he would say. So, but the point is that the impact of this for you is that you're entering an economy that's half dead. And the reason it's half dead is that it is terrified of what this president has done and what these policies have done. Now, what's the solution? Very complicated. Stop! Stop the spending, stop the borrowing, stop the experimenting, and pay it down. And if we begin to pay that debt down a little bit and we cut that deficit a little bit, the world is going to be so relieved and it's going to be cool. The reason Greece is in trouble is because of us. There isn't enough money to go around the world, so the weakest countries get hit first. So they'll still lend money to the US, but they won't lend it to Greece. But it's the US's debt that's causing the problem in Greece. If everything were going fine, they wouldn't worry about Greece. They'd lend money because there's not that much debt in the world and there's plenty of room for growth. So the policies he's adopted have really consigned this generation to a life of economic disaster unless we're able to change it. Now, while that's going on, that's macro, okay? Micro is a little bit of a different story. Micro says that we are going from a country where people work hard, pay taxes, and don't get aid from the government, to a country where people don't work, pay no taxes, and get handouts and entitlements from the government. And this isn't rhetoric, it's statistics. In 1980, 30% of all Americans got a check from the government. Now 50% get a check from the government. In 1980, 1/3 of government spending was cash transfers, checks and money given out to other citizens. Now it's 2/3. In 1980, 20% of Americans got welfare checks from the government. Welfare, food stamps, subsidized housing, all that Medicaid, not counting Social Security or Medicare or Earned Income Tax Credit, because those aren't means-based. But means-tested welfare from the government. Now it's 33%. 100 million Americans basically get some form of welfare. And in 1980, about 30% of Americans paid no income tax. Now 50% of Americans pay no income tax. What happened really was that whenever Bush cut taxes on rich people, he also cut taxes on poor people because he wanted it to be politically balanced. And as a result, he ended up exempting a huge portion of the population from paying any taxes at all. So we're now a country where half of us pay taxes and half of us get money. And it's more or less, you're more or less one or the other. You either eat it or you generate it. And the problem is that that creates a situation we don't want. And if we leave Obama in for 4 more years, we can have not 50-50, but probably 40-60. And at that point, the whole country tips. And at that point, nothing works, because nobody's going to sit there and produce and be stuck with it and have to pay it so other people can go on welfare. When Obama took office, 70 million Americans of working age did not work. Okay? Now 100 million do not work. Of that 30 million, about 7 or 8 million of it are officially called unemployed. Those are people that are still knocking around looking for work. But 20 or 22 million of it are people who have left the labor force. And that's like a 55-year-old who retired early when he lost his job and doesn't think he can get another, and now is kind of scrimping and saving toward retirement. It's the 25 or 28-year-old single mother married mother who took a job while her husband worked as a young baby, and now got fired and cuts back on the daycare and stays home all the time, undoing really 30 years of feminism. Of the people who've left the labor force voluntarily since Obama took office, 90% are women. It's rolling back 20 years of progress of women working. So the problem is that we're headed into being a country that we don't want to be, a country that really doesn't work, and a country where really the whole focus is on redistributing the income, not on generating the income. And that is the fundamental flaw of Marxism and of socialism. It is a fine scheme for redistributing wealth, but it's a lousy scheme for creating wealth. Now, when you had an agrarian economy where there was a certain amount of acreage, and you'd plant it, and it would rain or it wouldn't rain, you'd harvest it, you'd sell it, and that's cool. Production wouldn't vary very much based on government policies. It was all farming. But now that it involves investment and entrepreneurialism and creativity and hard work and taking risks and all the stuff that it involves that goes into making money, if you don't let people keep it, they're not going to make it. Duh. And what's going on now is that because of this entitlement society, because of this growth of the public sector, and because of the obstacles the government's really putting in our way of debt and all that stuff, people are simply not taking those risks. They're not going out and investing, and they're not going out and making money. Then you have a couple of other boutique issues that I want to address. One of them is climate change. I am, unlike many of my fellow conservatives, a deep believer that there is climate change happening, and I believe that we don't know if it's man-made or man-reversible, but we might as well try, because otherwise we could be in a disaster. But the amazing thing about what's going on now is that the United States, which never signed the Kyoto Accords, my boss, Bill Clinton, signed them, but he never submitted it for ratification because he knew he couldn't get it passed. But you know what's happening? We are beating the Kyoto guidelines. The United States is one of the best countries in the world in reducing our carbon emissions without cap and trade, without taxation, without government regulation. What's doing it is what always does it in a democracy: public education and the market economy. There's nothing about $4 gas that doesn't work in stopping people from driving and getting people to buy better cars, more fuel-efficient cars. And when we frack, this underground drilling that we do that's very effective, I'll talk about it in a minute, when that produces enough gas so that you have so much gas that gas costs half of what coal costs, everybody's going to switch from coal, which is very dirty, to gas that's pretty clean. And as a result, the United States, which was obliged to reduce its carbon emissions from 6,000 million metric tons, just think 6,000, to 5,000 by 2020, is at 5,000 right now in 2012, 2013. We've achieved the goal that we set for ourselves in 7 years. And probably by the 2020, the US will be down to 4 or 3,500. things that were never even dreamed of when the Kyoto Accord was signed. So why is everybody going crazy about regulation and cap and trade and all that stuff? Because it's a phony excuse. It's what they want to do anyway, and they're doing it in the name of climate change. They want to regulate the economy. They want to decide who wins and who loses and who gets what and who gets this. And they use climate change as an excuse to do it, not as a goal of doing it. If you're in politics, you want power. That's why you're in politics. And if you can control the economy, you have that much more power. And if you're a bad person, you have that much more potential for corruption. And if you're a good person, you have that much more capacity for what you consider to be right outcomes in our economy. But the point is that we've learned over many, many years that the government doesn't make the right choices when it comes to what to invest in. I'll give you a great example. Bill Clinton taught me. In 1980, I ran all of his governor campaigns. We were very close in the president campaign, and we were very close. He said, okay, in 1980 through 1990, in the mid-80s, the Japanese government, which controls and directs its economy, there's the Ministry of Information and Trade, MITI, and they give all of industry their marching orders, decided that laptop computers were not going to catch on, that the real future was mainframe, huge computers that big industrial enterprises had. And as a result, they cut their investment way back in laptops or portable or iPhones or any of that. And they put it all into mainframe, gigantic computers. And the United States government agreed with them, but we didn't have the power to do anything about it. And everybody in the private sector said, you're crazy, it's going to be laptops, we're going to be driven by what the market wants. And as a result, Japan has had 20 years of no economic growth and stagnation, and we've had enormous economic growth and enormous expansion of our job base, because we let the market determine it, rather than a few people in government. And that really is the crucial division between the two concepts. When I was a kid, I thought that people got more conservative when they got older because they got richer and they wanted to protect their money. And that still is right for many people. But then I've come to conclude that when people get older, they get more conservative because they realize that the way to achieve the idealism of their youth is not necessarily the straight line that liberalism offers, but the often more circuitous and intelligent journey that conservatism offers. One of the main things I worked on with Clinton was welfare reform. So on the surface, it was a really Republican conservative program. We told everybody on welfare, it's not handicapped, you gotta work, you gotta put in a full day, you can't stay on here for more than 5 years. But then on the other hand, we extended the tax credit if you worked so that the money was magnified. We raised the minimum wage. We extended eligibility for Medicaid and food stamps so work paid. And you know what happened? We reduced welfare rolls by 50%, so the conservatives were happy. And we reduced child poverty by 1/3, the last significant reduction. There's been the only significant reduction since Lyndon Johnson's days. Because we made people work. And we made people take their lives seriously and get on with it and go ahead. And that was a great example of a conservative program that had a liberal outcome. Now let me show you a liberal program that had a lousy outcome. When I was in my 20s, the big thing was Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring, which basically founded the environmental movement. You guys remember the song that maybe you would listen to it in your cradle. Take paradise and put up a parking lot, and save me spots on the apples, but give me the birds and the bees. Well, she succeeded. We stopped DDT. We outlawed it. As a result, malaria, which was extinct in Africa, came back because the mosquitoes came back. And now 5 million kids a year die of malaria in Africa. And there is no significant evidence that the DDT would have caused any harm if we'd kept it up. And in fact, we're now bringing it back in an effort to get back to where we were before we started this crazy thing. I'll give you another example. I told you I believe global warming is happening. Well, when I was 30 years old, I was one of the leaders in the movement that killed off nuclear power in the United States. Because I watched the movie China Syndrome with Jane Fonda, and I was worried about this massive meltdown. And 3 Mile Island happened, and Chernobyl in Russia happened. And I just thought if we have nuclear power all over the world, it's going to be a fiasco. Well, P.S., the Russians couldn't do anything right, so Chernobyl is sui generis. 3 Mile Island, nobody got killed. There wasn't even an increase in cancer deaths in that region historically. And nothing else happened. In the meantime, France provides 80% of its electricity through nuclear power. And if we got 80% of our electricity through nuclear power, there would be no climate change. There would be no emissions. There'd be no coal. Who would need that? So that's a great example of a liberal policy that destroyed a liberal objective. The one that was most convincing to me was that I was really a nuclear freak. I was absolutely determined to stop the spread of nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear war. I was 15 years old during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world almost blew up. And let me tell you how close it came to blowing up, how close you all came to not being born. In 1962, the Russians put missiles in Cuba, which made the United States within range of Russian missiles. So the Kennedy administration got really crazy about that and was determined to stop it. And the administration decided to bomb Cuba and wipe out the missile sites. They called it a surgical strike. And they called in the CIA and they said, are there any Russian troops in Cuba? And they said, no, none. And a few to install the missiles, but basically none. So we could strike Cuba and not kill any Russians. Right. Then finally, at the last minute, Bobby Kennedy intervened and stopped them from the bombing, saying this would be like Pearl Harbor. The U.S. doesn't do that. We don't do sneak and surprise attacks. Do an embargo and let them back down gently. And he did. About 8 years later, the surviving policymakers from the Russian and the American side met at a conference in Moscow and exchanged what was really happening. Do you know there were 50,000 Russian troops in Cuba? If we had bombed Cuba, we would have killed thousands of Russian troops, and World War III would be upon us, and this planet would be a fiery mass of molten metal. That's how close we came. This close. Literally, it was a day before the strike was launched that we decided to stand down. I can't stand horror movies because reality is worse. So the point is that really freaked me, and I was going to do something about it, and I worked against nuclear armament. I wanted a nuclear freeze. I wanted disarmament. I opposed the Star Wars initiative, and everything Ronald Reagan did, I opposed. And he was right and I was wrong. Russia went away. It collapsed. There's now still a danger that Iran will get the bomb or something and there might be a nuclear explosion, but there is no danger that the entire planet Earth gets wiped out by a full-scale nuclear war. And that was all what I wanted to achieve. And it was achieved by strength and armament and deterrence and outracing the Russians in the arms race rather than what I wanted to do. So I thought of all that, and it really made me think, and it was part of a lifelong journey really to the right. Not because I changed my ideals, but because I changed my practical understanding of how to achieve those ideals. The short way of saying it is Winston Churchill's. If you're not a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative when you're 40, you have no brain. Now, I'd like to introduce, do I introduce him? Mark? Yep, well, I think I do. Herman Cain? Herman Cain completely set this country on its head when he ran for president in 2008. Obviously, he didn't win the nomination, but his legacy and the issues he raised are incredibly, incredibly important. The first thing he did was he basically said that we have got to have a huge cut in the income tax. That if we let people keep the money that they make, they're going to make more of it. And if you can invest money in nuclear energy or computer technology or internet or smartphones or whatever, and you could invest it in France or Britain or China or the United States. And the United States is going to take less of your income, less of your profit in taxes. You're going to invest it in the United States. And I know that he's right, because when I worked for Clinton, we balanced the budget. We eliminated the budget deficit for 4 years. Clinton says we did it through arithmetic. He said that at the convention here. He's totally wrong, and he knows it. It had nothing to do with arithmetic. The arithmetic was an 8-year track to a balanced budget. In 1996, we were saying by '03, we'd balance the damn budget. In fact, what happened was in '97, he cut the capital gains tax, and he said, we'll only take 20% of your profit, not 30%. And the result was a fantastic increase in investment, tripling, quadrupling of investment in the U.S., creating 20 million jobs and flooding the Treasury with revenue. So they balanced the budget in 18 months, not in 8 years. And it wasn't arithmetic, it was tax cutting that incentivized creation. You can either say, we're really poor, we need a lot of government aid, we need a lot of handouts, so we need to raise taxes, particularly on rich people, and that way we'll have enough. Or you can say, we'll cut back on all of that, we'll lower the taxes, we'll create quadrillions of jobs at very good rates of pay, and nobody will need those entitlements in the first place. The problem with the first approach is it's a downward spiral to zero, just like is happening in Greece. You just run out of money. Whereas the other way is really a dynamic way to grow the economy. And Herman Cain really focused the national debate on those issues. And his best days are ahead of him. He has a brilliant future ahead, and I'm so happy that you came here to see him. So if he's around, Herman Cain.